Welcome back. And when we left, we were talking about the situation in Denmark in terms of legislating the antibiotic use. I want to just shift gears a little bit, keep that whole thought of what's going on in Denmark, and because there's some things that happen there. But I'd like to talk about traditional farming practices, livestock production practices, and organic. And if you just take a moment just to contrast what's going on there, certainly with the use of antibiotics and the overall production, and a little bit about growth promotants as well.
Sure. So animals don't necessarily pay attention to how you're raising them, right? They will get sick whether they're raised conventionally or whether they're raised organically or naturally. You'll get sick animals either way. So when animals get sick, they need to be treated. It poses a bit of a challenge for some of the natural organic producers, right? Because then they have to maintain two streams of production. There's the organic stream and then the natural stream that can go with everybody else's. And that's fine, because as long as everybody's paying attention to the withdrawal times and label recommendations and doses and routes of administration and things, the beef is still absolutely fine. And you need to treat animals when they get sick. Now, the challenge with the Denmark thing, the weird tie-in there, is that when they banned the use of antimicrobials to maintain animal health, and they what happened is that animals would get that much sicker before you treated them, which meant that they had to use higher power drugs to treat them, which is why they shifted into those top two categories of importance. And actually what they've seen since they introduced that legislation is that they've doubled the amount of drugs from those very high and high importance categories that are getting used in beef production. So
that's a huge unintended consequence.
It is, yeah.
And how do you see that being reversed?
Well, what we're hoping is that in North America, science is going to prevail, and that when there's discussion around policy or regulation around antimicrobial use, that it look at, well, what are the facts? Are we seeing problems with resistance? Let's not respond to a problem that doesn't exist, so that we can avoid unintended consequences and make sure that if there is a regulatory or a policy response needed, that it'll focus on what the problem is.
And it seems that the response here, or at least the reason for the legislation, was based upon consumer perceptions versus science. Would that be a correct assertion? I have no idea what that question meant.
Yeah.
You're talking about the science, about the different four categories of antibiotics and having this resistance problem being built up. Do you think the legislators were advised of the science before they made the legislation, or were they just responding to what the consumer wanted?
The current surveillance, the current surveillance program and the current policies in place are very outcome-based, which means that they're developing policies and regulations to avoid the development of antimicrobial resistance, so those drugs that are of high importance and very high importance in human health. And so that's what the surveillance is focused on, and that's what the policies and regulations are focused on as well. So where that becomes important is it is illegal to use drugs of high and very high importance for growth promotion in cattle, in livestock. Yeah.
So that's excellent. Now, you brought a slide along with you here about growth promotants, so we're just going to shift gears here for a second.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to talk a little bit about what's going on with growth promotants.
Okay, so the beef industry uses growth promotants. We've used them for 40 years. We've used them for a long time. And I guess a couple of points around this is that these companies that sell growth promotants don't just cook them up in the bathtub and then put them in a bottle, put a label on them, and sell them. There is a really high level of scrutiny that these things go through before they are ever approved to be used in livestock and hit the market at all. And a lot of this drug development will take 10 or 15 years between the time it gets first dreamed up and the time it's allowed for use in livestock. So they go through a real high degree of scrutiny before they're ever allowed to be on the market, and then also at packing plants, it's like the Olympics. They do routine drug testing, random spot checks on animals to identify whether they have residues of antibiotics or growth promotants. And actually, they do random testing, but they also do targeted testing. If an animal comes in that looks doesn't look quite right, they will call it a subject animal, put a special tag on it, and they will follow it and put all the organs through real special attention and look at all the muscles and whatnot, look for any signs of abnormality so that they can focus their testing even more.
Now, you mentioned the role of drug companies in this, and we have a consumer trend going on right now that looks at agribusiness rather negatively, and it looks at pharmaceutical companies as pushing an agenda or pushing their desires to make money by concocting diseases in some cases, by pushing this on the producer, by focusing on things like confined livestock facilities and things like that. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think the reason that there's a market for growth promotants is that there is a market for affordable beef. And the use of growth promotants does a couple of things. And one is that if we can use things like the ionophores that I mentioned earlier, if we can use beta agonists, if we can use implants, what that does, it allows animals to grow more efficiently. If we were raising cattle now the way we were back in the 1950s, we would need a tremendous lot more, we need an awful lot more resources. If we removed growth promotants from our current production system, we would need 10% more cattle, we'd need 10% more land. We've got a slide about this. We got 10%, we need 10% more feed, 7% more fuel, 7% more fertilizer, and we'd produce 10% more manure, we'd produce 10% more greenhouse gases, and beef would cost 10% more. And that's just to produce the same amount of beef.
So really, when you look at some of the environmental benefits of this kind of use of growth promotants, however they're introduced, one key thing is they keep the animals from consuming too much feed. They're not in the feeding regimen for as longer than they need. They're out sooner, so that means they're brought to processing sooner. Meaning they're not producing greenhouse gases by staying on the feedlot or in the pen or whatever, and that's a definite benefit to the environment, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, back in the days when cattle were raised out on the open range, I mean, it would take 3 years before an animal had reached slaughter weight, and that was partly because grass grows well in the summer, so there's a lot of grass for cows to eat, and then in winter they go backwards, so it takes it's kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it would take 3 years before they reached.
Good. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Canadian food system of CFIA and a few things on food safety. So join us.